Hello viewers, once again it's me, Nomaren, and this is my channel, It Pays to Fear God. This is where we learn about God, His beloved Son Jesus Christ, and their kingdom purpose, the three most important subjects that we can ever learn about, talk about, or discuss in the entire Holy Bible, according to John chapter 17 verse 3. The subjects that I have prepared for you and myself today is captioned Facts About Heaven. However, before I get into that, I once again have a tune that some of us might enjoy, and while the tune's playing, please try to subscribe and click the notification bell to be notified when we make future uploads. Once again, the subject that I've prepared for you and myself today is captioned Facts About Heaven. Anytime we think about heaven, we usually get very excited because we think that it's a place where all righteous ones are going to be going. We're going to go up there, God is going to judge this world, and then we're going to live eternally in heaven. However, I want to tell some of you viewers some facts about heaven, and these might make us feel good, and these might make us feel a little disappointed, depending on what our views are. But heaven, regardless, can be defined in two ways. Heaven means high, and it can be described as a place of abode, a place where somebody can live, and it can also be defined as authority, leadership, somebody being high, and then there being a subordinate, which would be considered earth, earth meaning low. And the Bible has used the word heaven to describe both things, a place of abode and leadership or authority. For example, in Psalms chapter 115, verse 16, David the psalmist, talking generally about where God lives, had stated, "The heavens, even the heavens are the Lord's, but the earth hath he given to the children of men." If you also read Psalms chapter 11, verse 4, it describes the heavens as God's holy temple. See also Psalms chapter 87, verse 1, and many other places all over the Bible, because as it says, the heavens are where God lives. But this doesn't mean that God lives outside the universe. The first heaven is where the birds fly, Job chapter 35, verse 11, and Genesis chapter 1, from verses 6 to 8. Then the second heaven is space, and then God just lives outside it. No, He lives within the universe. Not that we're going to see God, but He lives within the same space, generally. But it's just that we can't see Him because He is a spirit, like all other spirits. We can't see them, we can't feel them, we can't hear them, smell them, because they don't abide by physical standards. And I talked a lot about this in my first video, Who is God? Talked a lot about the kinds of ways the spirits live, the kinds of rules that abide there, because they don't have flesh, blood, or bones. If we read Luke chapter 24, verse 39. As a result, they technically fill the whole earth like God. If we read Jeremiah chapter 23, verse 24, 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 27, and 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 6. But whether we know this or not doesn't really mean anything, because whether God lives here, 1 million miles away from here, the second kind of heaven still prevails, and that is authority. Whether God lives here or in Venus or in Mars, whether He is present in any of those places, doesn't matter. But wherever He is, He still rules this world with the same amount of authority. So we have to understand the second type of heaven, authority, because we have to understand how God controls this world. In Isaiah chapter 55, from verses 8 to 11, God Himself said that my ways are higher than the ways of human beings generally. That's why when God says He wants to do something, we can't exactly change that. And Isaiah the prophet expressed this in Isaiah chapter 14, Verse 27, where it stated, "For the Lord of hosts hath purposed, and who shall disannul it? The Lord has stretched out his hand, and who shall turn it back?" Nobody can turn it back because God doesn't have any competitor. He doesn't have any real rival because he is the God of gods and the Lord of lords. If read Psalms chapter 95 verse 3 and Deuteronomy chapter 10 and verses 16 and 17. As a result, when he also pronounces judgment, his words must come to pass, and that is the whole basis on top of which the judgment of the living is happening in these last days. If we read Psalms chapter 96 verse 13, verses 1 to 13, and John chapter 12 verse 48. The words that I have spoken, the same shall judge him in these last days. And the fathers of people like the Pharisees, etc., they thought that they could do whatever they want, they could go against God, and God's words and judgment would end up catching up with them. But 586 BC, when Nebuchadnezzar took them into exile, clearly shows us that God's judgments and God's words really follow people who don't obey his laws. And that was where in Zechariah chapter 1, from verses 4 to 6, God was warning the people that he was talking to, don't be like your fathers, because the words that I commanded them ended up overtaking them. Your fathers, where are they? My words, haven't they overtaken your fathers? Haven't they gone against your fathers and destroyed them? Your fathers aren't here, but I am still here. That tells us that God exercises authority in these last days and generally in the world. And not only does he exercise authority, but it's important that we understand he also controls who gets to have authority in this world. People can't just say, I want to rule the world, I want to rule a country, I want to rule people. God has to be in support of that in order for you to even be able to do it. For example, in Exodus chapter 9 verse 16, when God was talking about the leadership that Pharaoh was exercising, not even in his favor, but generally what he was doing, he stated, "And in this very deed for this cause hath I raised thee up, for to shew in thee my great power, and that my name may be declared throughout all the earth." Pharaoh thought in Exodus chapter 5 verse 2 that there's no God. All this power, all this wealth, all this fame and stuff that I'm living on top of, I got that myself. And Nebuchadnezzar thought the same because he thought that he himself got all of it. But God taught both of those individuals lessons. Exodus chapter 7 to 11 tell us that God shook the heavens, shook Pharaoh's leadership by bringing 10 plagues that ravaged the land and ravaged the belief that people had of Pharaoh, because he couldn't stop the 10 plagues that were just destroying the land. And that was how God defeated them. Nebuchadnezzar spent 7 years in the wilderness. People must have been looking at him. This is our king, and now he's an ox and stuff, because pride isn't good and God controls who rules in the heavens. That was in Daniel chapter 4 from verses 30 to 37. And for such reasons, in Psalm chapter 75 verse 7, David the psalmist had stated, "But God is the judge. He putteth down one and setteth up another." And in 1 Samuel chapter 2 verse 8, after Hannah had got her son, praying for a long time, she stated, "He raiseth up the poor out of the dust, and lifteth up the beggar out of the dunghill, to set them among princes, and to make them inherit the throne of glory. The pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and he has set the world upon them." For such reasons, God controls who rules this world. And in these last days also, the beast that is currently taking control of everything in this world is only doing so because God has approved of it, agreeing, giving him his will, and to agree. If you read Revelation chapter 17 and verses 16 and 17, and Daniel chapter 9 verse 27, God is allowing this to defeat the whore represented in that Revelation chapter 17 and verses 16 and 17. And that is spirituality in these last days. He's getting rid of it because of the thousands of years that they had spent disobeying him and trying to use that as an opportunity to make wealth for themselves. If we read Joel chapter 3 verse 5. Then God is also shaking the heavens in these last days. Shaking the heavens. Once we understand that the heavens are authority in these last days, it will be easy for us to understand the fact that God is going to be shaking them, because they have spent thousands of years not acknowledging God, but wanting to take the power to themselves represented in that Revelation chapter 13 from verses 2 to 4. Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? However, God said that he's going to shake the heavens in these last days so that the heavens can belong to himself. If we read Isaiah chapter 13 verse 13 and Jeremiah chapter 10 verse 10. And in Haggai chapter 2 in verses 6 and 7, Haggai the prophet, from God's inspiration, had stated, "For thus saith the Lord of hosts, yet once it is a little while, and I will shake the heavens and the earth, and the sea and the dry land. And I will shake all nations, and the desire of all nations shall come. For I will fill this house with glory, saith the Lord of hosts." And in Matthew chapter 24, verse 29, Jesus Christ also talking about how people are going to fall from heaven. Leaders are going to lose their power, had stated, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken." See also Ezekiel chapter 32 verse 7, Revelation chapter 8 verse 12, and Luke chapter 21 and verses 25 and 26. And an example in the Bible of the heavens being shaken are the Israelites, because though the Israelites were strong, they had armies, they were doing everything they could to reject God and to take everything to themselves. God said in Lamentations chapter 2 verse 1 that he pulled the Israelites down from the heavens, down from everything that they were cooking. And Job, talking about this idea in Job chapter 20 from verses 4 to 7, had stated, "Knowest thou not this thing of old, since man was placed on earth, that the triumphing of the wicked is short, and the joy of the hypocrite is but for a moment? Though his excellency is mounted up unto the heavens, and his head reacheth up unto the clouds, yet shall he perish forever like his own dung. They which have seen him shall say, Where is he?" And this was expressed in Ezekiel chapters 25 to 28, talking about how people will be looking at you and be like, wait, but this was the same person who was ruling us. Satan, the devil, of course, being the chief of this, who has been pulled down from the heavens that he was trying to achieve. If we read Isaiah chapter 14, from verses 12 to 15. From verses 1 to 20, it talks about the details of how Satan, the devil, was cast down from heaven, because he wanted to be like God. He wanted to be in the heavens and rule everybody, but God said, no, you're going to be in hell, and hell will be happy to meet you. If you read Isaiah chapter 14, verse 9. Very interesting text if we take the time to read it. And heavens have also been talked about as mountains in the Bible, and mountains are very high, and so has the kingdom of God being described as it, because when we are in the mountains, especially in the very high ones, we see everything. There is nothing that we can't see. And God's kingdom is like this. Because in Isaiah chapter 2 verse 2, Isaiah the prophet had stated, "And it shall come to pass in the last days, that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow onto it." See also Zechariah chapter 8 verse 3 and Psalms chapter 87 verse 1. It has been described as a very big and great mountain. If you read Revelation chapter 21 verse 10 and Daniel chapter 2 and verses 35, 44, and 45. It's very important that we keep this in mind. Then, another thing that many people wonder about considering heaven is what it means for something to come down from heaven. People think that New Jerusalem, or God's kingdom, is going to physically come down from heaven, and everything is just going to act so crazy, and Christians are going to be so happy and everything, and it's going to be such a joyful day. But in reality, it's already happening, in the sense that it isn't going to be some physical thing that's going to drop down from where they think God lives, and then we're going to start living eternally. No. In fact, Jesus Christ had addressed this matter in Luke chapter 17 and verses 20 and 21. "The kingdom of God cometh not with observation, neither shall they say, Lo here or lo there, for behold, the kingdom of God is within you." And in that Matthew chapter 6 and verses 9 and 10, when Jesus Christ was praying for God's kingdom to come at that time, God's kingdom wasn't going to come in this big illustration of glory and stuff. No, it was that the ideas were going to start being sold to people. When it talks about New Jerusalem coming down from heaven, if you read Revelation chapter 3 verse 12, chapter 4, the whole chapter from verses 1 straight down to verse 11, And chapter 21 from verses 1 straight down to verse 22 at the end of the chapter, it talks about how God's kingdom and the ideas that drive its success are going to be established in the hearts of some people who are born with the ability to not only subdue the evil in their hearts, if we read James chapter 4 verse 7, resisting the devil, but are generally passionate about things considering the kingdom of God. And just as how God, of course, executes his judgments in heaven, so do parents, husbands, anybody that rule, whether one person or many, have that same kind of authority, in the sense that people who are in heaven rule over people that are on earth. For example, in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 3, every stage of somebody ruling somebody else is considered heaven and earth. But I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. All of those kinds of stages have their heavens and have their earth. See also Ephesians chapter 5 from verses 22 straight down to verse 29 or up to verse 31. Colossians chapter 3 from verses 18 to 24. And 1 Peter chapter 3 from verses 1 to 7. In fact, in Psalms chapter 82 verse 6, they were even considered gods. I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. If we are parents, we are like gods onto our children. This doesn't mean oppression, but we rule and preside over their affairs. Talked about all over the Bible, that kind of headship that a man has over a woman, etc. Then, one more thing. What does it mean to fall from heaven? I just discussed coming from heaven. What does it mean to fall from heaven? Well, we can go back to Satan the devil, for example. Satan the devil was like a star that fell from heaven. If we read Revelation chapter 9, verse 1. When we talk about falling from heaven, many people start to think that Satan the devil was in heaven, then he came down to this earth, and now he's a human being, killing people, stealing from people, etc. No. Satan the devil is as much of a spirit as he was when he was first created, and he was when he decided that he wanted to rule this world. But like I said, heaven meaning authority, when it says a star fell from heaven, Satan the devil, after losing the battle in Revelation chapter 12, from verses 1 to 12, lost a ton of power, which is why he is a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour, if you read 1 Peter chapter 5 in verses 8 and 9, because he has but a short time. If you read Revelation chapter 12, verse 12. I hope that all of you viewers now come to an understanding of what heaven means. We should be looking more at heaven as authority so that we can understand that Satan should not be ruling us in his own heaven, but God should be ruling us in the heavens of heavens. In Isaiah chapter 57 verse 15, God even said that people who are righteous and live by his principles are going to be considered living in heaven, because wicked ones to God are ones on earth, and righteous ones of God are considered people in heaven, not physically but spiritually, having more power and dignity and generally discretion from God. For thus saith the high and lofty one that inhabiteth eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place, with him also that is of a contrite and humble spirit, to revive the spirit of the humble, and to revive the heart of the contrite ones. And I choose to end my talk on the subject, facts about heaven. To conclude this episode, I once again have a tune that some of us might enjoy. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you learned something most importantly. Please share to subscribe, share this video, and click the notification bell to be notified when we make future uploads. Thank you for listening.